No mai haere mai. Welcome to Farmers in the Field, where our Earthworker alumni share their regenerative organic horticulture projects. Join us in co-learning through these biology-first conversations and growing radical hope through food. You can hear about our mentors in episode 1. Come join us.
Kia ora, I'm Jake and I'm the head farmer at OMG. I've been a part of this project since October 2021 and I've been the head farmer for almost 7 months. For the Love of Bees is a charitable trust that aims to grow radical hope through food. OMG is For the Love of Bees lead project and models and tests regenerative and organic practices and techniques. As you can see, it's a highly urban area situated in a food desert. So it's really important that places like this exist so people can connect to where their food comes from and how it's grown. So here we have 2 photos just over a year apart, showing the transition from a pretty barren paddock to a highly productive, diverse urban farm. Here with OMG is also a site of experimentation and innovating new ideas. So the photo on the left demonstrates really good growth for sequestering carbon and water retention. However, all of the height created a lot of shade, which meant it was really hard to grow root crops and leafy greens in summer. This is summer 2021 and 2022. So coming into the new summer season, we'll be trying to innovate new ideas where we can do both. So just a few key points here. We're producing about 40 vegetable boxes a week, and we've created 1.7 full-time jobs. So that's me on 40 hours a week, Tom, my farm assistant, on 16 hours, and Levi, the farm mentor, on 8 hours. And on average, we have about 100 different species in the ground. This helps with the regeneration process, capturing carbon, building soil diversity, and it's also really important for us as farmers providing 40 vegetable boxes a week to have many different species growing at once. OMG is also a community hub and a place to teach people. It's really wonderful to have so many people come by the farm and help out, and we're really reliant on our volunteer help. Here's a few photos of the Earthworkers that have come through. We've had about 87 people come through OMG in Auckland. Earthworkers has been a really wonderful experience because it brings together a group of people that have a like-minded vision to create change and move forward in a positive way whilst also growing food.
Hi, I'm Sarah Smuts-Kennedy and I'm here with Daniel Schuurman and Levi Brinsdon-Hall to do some mentoring with our farmers in the field. We're really excited to be with our lead farmers, Jake and Tom, at our OMG farm. And they're going to start off by sharing some of the things they've learned that have been useful at the Earthworkers Programme.
Just to let you know, we're in the greenhouse. Ideally, we'd like to be out in the field showing you the farm, but it's quite windy today, so we're getting a bit of noise disruption. So we're in here. One of the key things that I learned from Earthworkers was correct soil management and looking after the soil in an appropriate way. Right before Earthworkers, our soil test, and back that we had been applying too much compost made from food. So we had excess amounts of organic matter and excess amounts of nitrates in our soil. And in the past, I've definitely had a tendency to be put a lot on, have a more is more approach, and that has obviously resulted in not great soils. So on the Earthworkers course, the information that was provided to us by Daniel and Sarah and Levi was really clear, explicit information on correct soil management, and it really made things very simple for us to understand. So moving forward to sort of rectify the problem that we've created, we won't be putting on compost for some years onto our beds, and we will, as soon as we have bare soil, we'll be covering that with plants. And that information really resonated with me because of, in general, my approach to growing and farming is to try and replicate nature as much as possible. So in nature, when we have bare soil, plants try and colonize its space as quickly as possible to protect it. So for me, that felt like it made a lot of sense. And as Sarah sort of said on the course, there's a lot of information that we know, but we're just unlocking. That was one of those moments for me.
One important concept that I've been learning at the farm is the importance of succession. In one of our beds, we had harvested most of the crops that we wanted to get out of there, and I was keen to start planting back into it immediately to maximize photosynthesis in that bed and not leave any space. We wanted to put broad beans in there, but we had just planted a succession of broad beans the week earlier. So a nugget of wisdom that I have got from Jake and Levi is that it would actually be more beneficial to leave weeds and what's in there to photosynthesize into the ground and plant the broad beans in a second succession, because we just planted broad beans a week earlier, and if we planted them directly after, we would have had a flood of broad beans at the end of the season. So stacking them and having enough space between plantings and just letting the natural weed cover and the plants that were still in there to photosynthesize instead of trying to clear it and leave it bare.
The first question that I have is in preparation for season, spring and summer season, and it's around growing tomatoes. So in my experience, the best crops of tomatoes that I've had have been the ones that I haven't pruned and I've let grow wild with as little maintenance as possible. Daniel mentioned in the Earthworkers that pruning tomatoes and taking off the laterals can open them up to infection and disease. So again, going back to the previous sort of thing that I learned about replicating nature, letting the plant do its own thing. My question is, on a farm like this, how do we grow tomatoes that we usually trellis and prune? How do we grow them without pruning them and allowing them to do their thing naturally, whilst also supporting them so that the weight of the fruit doesn't break and snap the plants?
Thanks for that question, Jake. Really controversial topic, and a really interesting one, I think, too, because the majority of commercial tomato growers, at least that you see online and kind of out there following mainstream methods, will run a single leader. They'll be growing indeterminate varieties, meaning that it will just keep producing leaves and nodes and flowers and fruits so long as the plant is healthy. And really the first sort of place that we're going to go to look at answer this question comes to your variety of tomato that you want to grow. So for instance, the large beefsteak varieties, where you can get an 850 gram fruit just on one thing, those are really prized fruits, and they will turn up naturally, but also you want to just get on them the moment that they're ready, because obviously there's loads of birds and stuff about, and crop like a cherry tomato or a smaller one where there's prolific amounts of fruits, I know that they can get pretty wild and messy and grow very rampantly as well. And that's a lot more, I think, easy to manage in terms of a wild method would be lots of little fruits. But really important to note is that there is no one way that is going to be the best universal way for someone to grow a plant. There are many ways, and the principles that we teach is maximum photosynthesis, maximum biodiversity. What I would encourage you to do is to do some of your own trials. The first thing that I'd say is, if it is a big variety like a beefsteak and you want to grow them mad and sprawling, what's going to happen is they'll grow up vertical, and then the moment that they set fruit, they're going to want to fall down. Gravity is going to want to take them down. So you're going to want some sort of structure for them to lean upon. I'd look at maybe doing mesh on multiple levels, or creating kind of like a box frame sort of system. The other thing, the question is, what are you going to polycrop it with? Is there things that you could polycrop it with that would hold those tomatoes up and protect them? Because what happens when you let stuff grow wild is they will grow wild, it will take over the bed. So I think, especially for your context, an intensive market garden, we do want stuff to grow vertical, but then the trick is holding it vertically there. So many different methods, and what I'd encourage you to do is actually grow the same variety on 2 different beds, and do the 2 different methods, and record the weights and record your experiences, how much time you've put into work on it, and then make the answer up for yourself.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Daniel, do you have comment on that?
I did come across years ago trials that did exactly this, pruning versus non-pruning tomatoes. It was done in Manuary Botanical Gardens, specifically trialing exactly this. And my experience comes from that, essentially. And what they showed is the ones that they didn't actually restrict the growth of and allow to pretty much grow as they want. And tomatoes are pretty good at climbing up structures on their own. Is that they found, I can't remember the exact specifics or exactly how much the production increased, but they had significantly better production on those ones they didn't prune than the ones they did. So in a range of varieties, from memory as well. And, you know, it is all those sorts of questions in between as to whether you're trying to grow the crop in between other crops. Obviously, what I found doing it myself is when you let it mixed in with other crops, is that those tomatoes could be very aggressive and were quite hard for other crops that, unless they were naturally taller, to compete with them. So they could only be done alongside you know, crops that were going to get ahead of the tomatoes. If they were anything behind them, they generally got smothered. But yeah, as a simple answer, essentially, the greater the photosynthetic capacity, the greater the capacity of it to produce fruit. And a lot of the maintenance, because a lot of people when we talk about pruning, a lot of people remove a lot of leaves, and that has a direct impact on reducing photosynthetic capacity. But then there is a sort of a middle ground there where you can remove some of the shoots but leave the leaves, and so because that way you can kind of control the plant a little bit without restricting it. But quite often they strip all the lower leaves off and thinking that they need to get light or sunlight or whatever on tomatoes, often to keep disease away from it. But most of those diseases are to do with lack of calcium and things like that, not necessarily sunlight issues or air movement issues. So there's a middle ground between those two things, Jake. So you've got leaving all the leaves on where basically possible, because even if a leaf has only maybe, it's got lots of damage or it's getting a bit old, it doesn't mean that it's not still contributing to the plant, and removing a few of those shoots to allow it a little bit easier management. So yeah, there's a sort of middle ground between what you're talking about and what you can do to get the best result.
And I guess one of the other things that, you know, we're always talking about trying to grow vertically, which is really trying to defy gravity in some ways, whereas we know that there are also methods to grow, you know, to actually hang things down so that the, you know, you're not trying to resist gravity, but actually allowing the plant to work, you know, naturally without the, for example, the weight of a beefsteak tomato. What do you think about that, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, you can use, I'm not sure, tomatoes probably don't tend to hang down. They have a real natural tendency to not grow horizontally. They have a real tendency to want to grow vertically. So every time we try to make them grow horizontally, all the shoots keep trying to shoot up. So it is something that probably, whereas a cucumber or something like that you can grow up a trellis, that's quite easy to grow horizontally and have things hanging down. There's different species are more suited. I wouldn't think tomatoes, you can imagine a fruit hanging down, but the plant in itself probably as a general rule would be quite difficult to manage in that respect. I think the big thing about tomatoes is that you want to reduce the amount of effort and labor involved in trying to manage them and try and work to more of a natural system, but get all the productivity and then try and work it out. But Levi's right in some respects, you could have sort of try a few things to see what works in your situation, but certainly the principle of, as I said before, is the more leaves that we have on the plant, the better the overall growth of and production of that plant will be.
Your next question, Jake.
So we had white of up through into the beds, and usually I'm very pro weeds and like having them around for the photosynthesis, but obviously buttercups are a toxic plant, and when we grow food next to those plants, it becomes a health and safety issue. So I hope this is okay, but it's a little bit of a two-part question. And my first part is there something that the buttercups are trying to communicate with us about the conditions of the soil? Because obviously they like very wet soil. Is our soil too wet? And if so, what do we do to rectify that? And is there a way other than weeding, which so far has been very successful, to remove them from the beds?
Really good question. I have experienced it growing in heavy clay, wet, shaded soils. And yeah, obviously at OMG, there's quite a variety of soils that are there. Running through the middle of that farm, there was even a path, like the soil height kind of undulates. So it could be down to that, but really important and really good to hear that you're acknowledging the health and safety of that, because that's a really massive thing, especially in the context of OMG, where you've got chefs coming through and volunteers as well going through harvesting leaves. There is definitely an assumption that I've had some chefs come in through that farm before, and there is an assumption that everything that's there is, if it's pretty, it's for the taking and it's edible. And yeah, we really don't want to be sort of chopping off some of those buttercup leaves and putting them in to the salad mix, because they will give people a sore stomach. Look, mate, my approach to most weeds is hand weed them out of the middle of the bed, and then take care of your edges and just be real careful what you put on it. Yeah, in terms of weeds, like, we are lucky at the farm. Buttercup isn't really a bad one. You can manage that if you do pull them all out. They won't magically come back, especially with the not tilling the soil between crops as we already do. But yeah, I just get in there and hand weed it from the middle and plant something else right in there. Yeah, there's more difficult weeds to manage, but I think as a health and safety matter, get it out, because it could make people sick.
Yeah, I agree that firstly, removing them, is obviously the best sort of way forward with these things in particular. But in terms of what they're telling you, you're right in terms of that they're like wet feet, they're like excessive moisture in the soil. You have gone through a period where like New Zealand suffered about 6 significant weather events in 2 months, and so you're sitting on the back of extremely excessive rain, I guess, in some respects. Part of the reason, so your soil essentially under those conditions, the soil is favouring or creating favourable conditions for buttercups, which is hence why they've appeared or thriving. How you deal with that, one of the first things you usually look at is the cal-mag ratio, because the calcium to magnesium ratio will dictate often how easy that soil drains. So, you know, there's not necessarily in this regard with OMG, we're not necessarily too far off where we need to be, but the excess organic matter holds, I mean, organic matter, every 1% organic matter holds something like 175,000 litres of water per hectare. So when you've got 5% extra or more organic matter than you should have, your soil has the ability to hold an awful lot more water than it should. And this is part of the balancing equation. So although we might have the chemistry balanced, if we haven't also got the organic matter within that framework, then we end up with these sort of situations where your excess organic matter can create the ability to hold on to excess moisture, slow down drainage, you know, and you get these kind of results as a consequence of that. So you're essentially, again, fixing the basic parameters of that soil is what long-term is going to deal with issues like buttercups. But in the short term, as Levi says, it's pull them out, some hand weeding, and just remove them for all the reasons that you've already explained in terms of, you know, ensuring they don't want to be eaten. And interestingly enough, that they're not that terribly toxic. They don't actually cause humans that much grief, but it's something you still don't necessarily want in there. They're more a problem sometimes to some animals, and it's usually only the older plants that are the issue, not young plants.
The good news is that they're easier to pull out when it is wet. You certainly don't want to be trying to remove them come summer when the soil systems are, you know, drier. So get them out while they're easy to tease out.
Just want to say a massive thank you to Daniel, Sarah and Levi for your time and help and wisdom on this project, and huge thank you to Catherine, who's often behind the scenes organising all of it. Really grateful for all of your help and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, big thank you to Sarah, Levi and Daniel for all the information they give us. Help really helps keep this place running, and thank you to Catherine for organising everything. Yeah, we'll see you at the next Farmers Field.
If you are inspired to become an earthworker and learn more about regenerative organic horticulture, look up our Earthworkers Programme on our website to register for our upcoming courses. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support us in making more, we welcome donations on our website fortheloveofbees.co.nz. For the Love of Bees is a charitable trust creating a system of self-sustaining urban farms in Aotearoa that cultivate quality food for local people through regenerative organic horticultural practices that heal the ecosystem. Through these sites, we create happier and healthier ecosystems and resilient, connected communities. We also create and share high-quality, accessible educational experiences around what a truly regenerative world looks like. For the Love of Bees aims to become a world-leading example of partnership, regeneration and participation for a thriving collective future. We started in 2016 as an optimistic and love-centred approach to engaging with ecosystem well-being in a time of climate uncertainty.